I'll start by welcoming everyone to planning a more equitable campus in a post-pandemic world. I'm Elliot Felix from Brightspot, joined by colleague Kelly, and this is a topic that we're passionate about, and we know you are too, and we're excited to share some insights and hopefully make progress on a very important topic. As we get going here, as a bit of a warm-up, would love for folks to just introduce themselves, and hello, I'm your name, from your location or your institution. Put that in the chat, and make sure you select everyone, and we'll start getting warmed up, because we certainly want this to be an interactive session, and we're gonna use the chat along the way. Okay, well, let's dive into the session. We're here to help you identify how campus facilities are often inequitable, and come up with strategies, share some insights about what to do about it. We're going to start with this, introductions and the objectives, do a quick warm-up activity, a short presentation on what we've seen about challenges in space. Then we're going to have an open discussion about how these challenges might be showing up or not at your institution, on your campus. We'll take a break, and then part two will be, if the first part is kind of doom and gloom on what the challenges might be, the second part is more of a bright future about some ideas to help you create a more equitable campus. We'll have a discussion about how that might apply at your institution, and we'll drop into Q&A, and there should be an interactive and useful format for all of you. We do a lot of these kinds of sessions, and we find it's always useful to have the chance to kind of reflect and apply, and also discuss with peers and colleagues. Just a bit about us. Brightspot's a higher ed strategy firm on a mission to create more engaging and equitable student experiences, and we think the way you do that is working with institutions to help them transform their space, their student services, their staffing, and their systems all at the same time, because student experience kind of sits at the center of that. And it's one thing to reimagine a space, a new library or classroom, but if it doesn't have the right support services, or the staff provide them in the right way, or you have the wrong systems, then it falls flat. So we've been lucky enough to do that for 95 different colleges and universities, and really excited to share our thinking with all of you today. So our icebreaker warm-up is our first poll, and we're going to kind of dive into like a word cloud here. So the key thing is to go to this link, and people are already doing it. So amazing. Thank you for jumping ahead. So we're looking for, just to kind of break the ice here, one word that describes your campus pre-COVID. And so far we've got active, students, movement, vibrant, and I was going to say community, but I see commuter there. Probably community as well. Friendly. Normal. That's a great one. Can't argue with that. So we'll give this another minute or so. Converse, friendly, active. And by the way, and as you've probably guessed, the size is indicative of frequency. So lots of folks saying active.
Got a crazy in there.
I like the crazy, normal, and happy are all kind of clustered together, which that sort of makes sense in a way. Crowded, engaging.
Maybe tension too.
Yeah. And all right, more folks. Everybody's getting the hang of this. This is great. So Now let's go to the ideal future campus. You know, it might be different from those things. It might be the same as those things, but you know, what are you going for in the future? You know, as you think about your campus, more engaging or engaging. It's a good start. Part of our mission. Stimulating, welcoming, relevant, like it. Innovative, flexible, inclusive, empowering. Well, this is great. Would anyone like to? I think we have a couple minutes here. Would anyone like to talk a little bit about kind of where they are and where they want to be? You know, as you think about these two exercises, and you can raise your hand in the participant window if you'd like to chime in. Or if you want to do it via chat, that's fine too. But it's always great to hear the kind of the thinking behind your words. No? Okay, well, I guess the ice is not fully broken, but we'll keep going.
I'll say something. This is Claudia.
Okay, go ahead, Claudia.
Sure, I don't mind. I think it's, yeah, this idea of what is the new normal, right? Which we're not out of the abnormal yet. So it's really hard to envision how what we're all going through is going to change our campus going forward. We're experiencing the current change. And the quietness and just the lack of people and movement and all, but what we're going towards, I'm not sure. So that's what I'm thinking.
Anita, you raised your hand. We'd love to hear from you too.
Thank you. You know, a lot of us are just focused on the here and now, and I'm thinking about what is going on that's going to shift the direction of higher education and our respective economies, and what are the resources that have already been put in our, on our plate, and the CARES, the HERF funding that's been rolled out, and how do you effectively leverage and put those funds into what I call strategic investments for more long-term implementation. And so we are an open admissions institution, and our students are not accustomed to full online instruction, so they've been adapting, but there are still a number of challenges. And our faculty as well forced to deliver courses fully online, and we've been working on providing as much wraparound support for them. But how do you leverage CARES funding to strengthen the core of the institution, including the types of investments with equipment in the classrooms, in the lab spaces, other kinds of initiatives, training the faculty in areas that they were not prepared to be trained in, but to not only to survive through this pandemic period, but also to thrive as we pivot towards other kinds of new markets beyond our existing local markets.
My name is Lisa, and I'm going to be a little bit more philosophical instead of the nuts and bolts here. Is that this has really experience for our faculty and students, and I'm at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, has pulled the scab off of what is reality. And it has allowed us to really not only feel the pain that we are experiencing, but feel the pain of others, because we have been put into the zone where we have to stop and process and think and rethink and then act quickly. And I think we've lived in a romantic zone. We're one of the most diverse institutions, and we all get together, and diversity, inclusion, and equity, and all of that. And you see the disparities that this particular COVID-19 has really, really highlighted. And so the scab has been taken off. There is bleeding. Now, what do we do? So that's more of a philosophical thing that I'm thinking of.
Right. Well, we certainly appreciate all these comments. I think they give us a good sense of where we're at and the challenge before us, and maybe some of the opportunity as well. And now I feel like the ice is broken, and we're excited. So excited to move ahead. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll dive into some of the inequities we see, and then we'll talk about how these are showing up or not at your institutions, and that'll kind of be the first half of the program, and then the second half will be more solution oriented. So let's dive in, and feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we're going to have time to discuss this as a group in just a few short minutes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where kind of coming from. I think we've been at this for about 10 years and worked with about 100 institutions, many of them AASCU Institute. We found our way to AASCU because he was the provost at SUNY Fredonia, was our client, and we did a student success project there. So we've learned from a lot of projects, but over the last 9 months in this unique session, I think we've learned in some new ways. We've conducted, we do an annual student experience survey. We've upped the tempo on that. We've done those national surveys, one in the spring, one in the fall. We've been doing a lot of roundtables with 45 different institutions over the last, we've worked on plans, white papers, webinars, and so this is kind of the perspective that we're bringing up. Probably not a comprehensive one, but hopefully some insights that help all of you. And as we think about the role of space, I think as a starting point, we want to make sure everybody understands, and you probably do, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But space really matters to outcomes. There's a solid and growing body of research about what activities lead to student success, and there's a body of research about how space can support or inhibit those activities from taking place. So the few that we often focus on: active learning, a proven strategy, you could support that, bringing student services together to make them easier to navigate and more accessible, project spaces that support and other projects that better engage students, help them find their passion, build the skills they need for a career, spaces that make faculty more accessible for mentoring. So space matters to outcome, and it also matters to students. And this is hot off the press, actually, a study we published today. We asked students, having in a lot of different dimensions, using our student experience snapshot survey in December, and we looked at which students were most satisfied. And interestingly, it was the students that were working in a communal space, either a third place like a cafe or a shared space like a library on the campus. The people that were kind of toiling away in isolation in a dorm or at their home were significantly less satisfied, which tells you something. So space matters to students, and something we've previously found is it matters even more to underserved students. This was a study we did a couple of years ago where we looked at the correlation between how students rated their satisfaction with the campus facilities and how likely they were to say they were growing. Their self-reported personal growth is the y-axis, and how likely they were to recommend their institution, x-axis. And the interesting thing is the correlations were much higher for underserved students. Generally higher for students of color, right? Meaning that they were further to the right and further higher, further up. But for underserved students, which we talked about as students that were low income, first gen, part-time, commuters, adult learners, students with disabilities, kind of all the segments of student populations that universities weren't historically, designed systemically and systematically support. Space matters even more to them. And I think one of the interesting things about Lisa, to use your metaphor of the scab, I think one of the unpleasant as it may be, I think one of the things that we've realized is so this summer is that asking more of ourselves and each other, that being neutral is not enough, right? We need to be anti-racist, and I think the same goes for our spaces. Spaces are not neutral, and in fact they need to swing the other way, and we need anti-racist spaces, and there's a kind of a hidden curriculum, hidden messages. You show up to study in a room with portraits on the wall and not like that sends a message about what success looks like. And of people like Professor Perez at Portland Community College has done great work on working with students to audit currents and make recommendations. So we know space, we know it matters even more to some students. We know it's oftentimes it's not neutral and it's sending the wrong message. We also know that there are some pretty familiar and frequent hotspots on a university campus nationally where we see the biggest disconnects between in levels of satisfaction when we look at certain characteristics like a student's race or their first generation status. The most frequent or the biggest disparities are generally in student health centers, athletic and rec space, events and affinity group spaces, or identity group spaces. And it plays out when services as well. I think NASPA has done great work. The chart on the right here showing that a first-gen student is about half as likely to go to student health, use those services as a continuing generation student. And the student health, I think, is a good example. A library is another one where a lot of the student experience isn't just about the physical space, it's the services in the space and online, and there's a connection there, right? You can have an inspirational, open, welcoming, inviting, functional space, but if services there aren't also efficient and effective and creative and inclusive, there's a disconnect. I think that library is a great example at NC State where the services are more visible and accessible, and there's a peer-to-peer model. But interestingly enough, we find big disconnects. So in our surveys, first generation students are the segment most satisfied with library spaces, but the least satisfied with library services. So you really need to think about these things together. And one of the reasons why there's often this disconnect is that there are some false assumptions folks are making. And I think, institutions are doing a better and better job at this, but an awful lot of the time, the idea is students are going to know what help is available. They're going to have that awareness, and they're going to be comfortable and able to access it. And for a lot of students, that's just not the case. So, we tend to think about it in terms of this 2x2. And if you're thinking about a post-traditional student, they're more likely to be in one of these orange boxes where they may not know that career advising or academic advising or tutoring or other support is available. On the other hand, they may know about it, but they may not be able to access it. They might not have the right technology. It might not be offered in the evening. So there's barriers there. We also know that on the kind of the complement to the services, when you think about programming, that can be inequitable as well. I think, Blake Silver has done some great research on this about how basically to accelerate their assimilation and fitting in, making friends, feeling welcome, sense of belonging, students adopt cookie cutter personas, the caretaker, the educator, that helps them sort of fit in and play a role. But the interesting thing is these roles aren't equally accessible and they're not equally valued, right? So women, students of color, may likely to take on the caretaker role than the educator or the leader manager role. And the roles end up being quite durable. Once you sort of self-categorize as a taker, you might be stuck in that role for all 4 years. And these systemic inequities have been amplified by the pandemic, and we've probably all seen the coverage. I think one piece that certainly brought it into stark relief was this piece in the Times about Haverford, where one student is going to her vacation home in Maine to study online, and another is going back to Florida to help out with the family food truck to keep that afloat. Doesn't have the right study environment, has more family responsibilities even than she had at school, and juggling an awful lot. And we know that these stresses and these challenges are showing up for students as they study online. Great survey that the Chronicle did, showing how a lot of the things that students find challenging are actually increasing. When you look at August to September, the biggest one being staying motivated, and secondly, concerns about just fulfilling their class requirements. And what this brings up is that COVID has revealed a bit of a paradox. We've all learned that we can do more online, but value being together in person more. And so we think this is really going to shift the rationale and the reason and the function of space to really foreground that community component, because there is a bit of a disconnect now. And classes went online, and a lot of institutions had the same tuition or fees, or maybe a small break, with the idea that there's continuity of classes. But the student experience is so much of that happened in the classroom. And when we ask students, how would you allocate your tuition? Only about 40% of it is to the classes, and maybe another 10%, a little less, is research activities. So the other 50% is about facilities, technology, student activities, student services, community. And going forward, we think it's really going to be about a campus that's for more than classes, that's really foregrounding the community, that's foregrounding the things you can't do online or can't do as well online. And this is really supported, when you talk to students about why they want to be together, why they want to be on campus. Of course, classes are there, but look at, it's the people, it's the community, it's the campus, it's the culture that's right up there with it. And doing that is going to mean that our spaces are going to have to be more flexible in the future. Before the pandemic, about 10% of faculty and staff worked remotely, 17% of students were fully online. Obviously, that's increased quite a bit, but in an ad hoc way. And we're going to have to sustain that, and relying on that flexibility. So, the idea that they're just going to go back to the way things were and everybody's going to work from the office 5 days a week is not really going to happen, or that everyone is going to take all their classes in person. That's not going to happen either. So there is going to have to be a more flexible approach. And as we look at how campuses might change, we see more hybrid and flexible courses, more student services online. That's certainly been a highlight. A lot of things, advising, a lot of things have actually become more accessible, which is great. probably less classroom space and more informal learning space, working together in projects and small groups. Of the classroom space, it's likely to be more flat and flexible for hands-on activities. More remote work means less office space, new kinds of residence halls that have more of an individual focus that actually, contemplate students learning online, reducing lease space, probably reducing the overall campus footprint, as you account for online learning and remote work, which means a lot of, repurposing of things. So these are some of the main points we've just covered, and we're interested to hear about how these ideas might be showing up on your campus or not, or there might be other challenges you're seeing. And so to dig into that, we're going to do a poll. So we'd love this is the same thing with poll everywhere, but instead of typing in a word, you're just pressing on the button. So we'd love what the top 3 challenges are at your institution, and these are drawn from what we just mentioned. So is it the space is sending the wrong message? Is it they're inequitably assigned? Is it the association of Black engineers that are tucked in some basement somewhere, or is it the services aren't aligned to the need, they're not available or aware, they can't access them, maybe they're rigid policies, maybe the programming is inequitable, maybe there's too much of a focus on the academics. And if you have other ideas, feel free to pick that and then tell us in the chat. Great. So it's interesting. The access and awareness of student services seems to be the biggest issue for folks. And then, with misaligned services as the number 3. That's really interesting. Everybody get a chance to weigh in here. I'll give it another minute or so, and then we want to open things up for discussion and hear your take. All right, so let's talk about this. What if folks see as their biggest challenge as they think about making their campus more inequitable? I'm guessing from the poll it has something to do with student services, but every choice had at least some folks responding. So who'd like to start us off? No problem, Claudia.
I'll start us off.
Go ahead, Celeste.
I think one of the biggest challenges is I work at a predominantly Black institution, not a HBCU, not a historically Black institution, but a predominantly Black institution. And one of the challenges I think that perpetuates inequity is that our services tend to be generic and not tailored to the population that we serve. And I think that it creates for the population, the students, a lack of motivation to access services. So I don't think it's just not being aware of the services, but not really seeing the services as relevant to them, even though obviously they are, but I think it just creates, because they're not tailored to attract our population, the students are less invested in them.
What's an example of a generic, non-tailored service? I think I get what you mean, but just to help us all.
Calling students who haven't logged in to their online classes. So gotcha. Just, we have a call center and they'll just run down the list if they haven't logged in X amount of days. And so not really thinking about all the ways that all the factors that may be impacting that student's engagement with an online class.
Gotcha. So good first step that, you know, that you're looking at the data and you're calling, but maybe that outreach is more generic and isn't getting at what an underlying challenge might be, or tailored to the person. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah.
You're muted. Okay.
Yeah. I think one of the problem, I'm at an HSI, but still predominantly white. So we're Hispanic serving, but still with a real mix of populations of students. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face is that our staff and faculty do not look like our students. And so staff and faculty are not always conscious of the ways in which they present to our students, and students don't see themselves and therefore don't always feel comfortable in utilizing the spaces or the services that might be available to them, even if they know that they are in fact available.
Right. I think part of that feeling comfortable and confident using something you know about has to do with, you know, the cultural competency of the staff, but also the makeup of the staff, for sure. Celeste,
sorry.
please.
Yeah, I was going to say that that really resonates with me, that I don't think that, like, we became a PBI not relatively recently, but in the last 20 years, I'll say. And as obviously the faculty and staff have not evolved in the same way demographically as fast as our student body has. And so the cultural competence piece is really important, because I do think that I have not seen any effort from the institution to do some cultural competence training, even as they do have been making a lot of effort in increasing services to students. But that is a really important point. I appreciate you all saying that.
Something we saw at NYU in their one-stop service center is, in addition to doing these trainings, they also they have a card or kind of a little object on the physical desk that shows, you know, our staff have been trained in these different types of awareness, which students shared, you know, help them feel a little bit more comfortable getting that little bit of a baseline.
And it's not a replacement, but I do think sometimes this is where peer-to-peer service models are also really helpful. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but in the case of you know, where the student demographics have changed faster than the faculty and staff demographics, oftentimes, you know, using students to help each other, you know, where appropriate can be very helpful, because then it's, you know, it's more accessible and more relatable too, in a way. What else? So we've talked a bit about the services and the, you know, and the staffing of those services. What about the space side of things? Where, you know, are you all finding the kinds of challenges we're seeing nationally about you know, space maybe sending the wrong messages, or not being allocated or located in an inclusive or equitable way? Deborah?
At Columbus State, we're currently going through a kind of a facilities master planning process. And, you know, this has been really eye-opening, and taking a look at the spaces that we have. How are they being used by students? How are they being used by faculty? for teaching as well as the co-curricular and extracurricular activities. And we're still in the process, but some things have really come out that are quite interesting in accessibility and feeling comfortable using the spaces. We have a very beautiful campus, a lot of outdoor spaces, but I've noticed when I walk the campus, I don't see a lot of students using those outdoor spaces to meet, to congregate, to study, to interact. And that has been something that has come out of the conversations from the students, from the faculty. And so we've been working on kind of changing that mindset of what is a space and how do you use that space and how do you make it inviting for, multiple purposes, where it's not just, this is a, this is a classroom and only classroom activities go on here, but really looking at how do we open up those spaces. So we have a ways to go, but I've just been really excited about those conversations and kind of where it's leading us to really using our campus as utilizing it in a much better fashion so that students see themselves in the space, they're using the space, and we're able to provide services in a much more approachable way.
That's great. I wanted to add, we've heard a lot about, colleges in light of COVID and trying to keep things outdoors, looking again at their outdoor spaces. And one success story recently from a community college, College of Marin here in California, is they, before the pandemic, just installed some kind of swings on campus, not like playground swings, but like comfortable kind of beach house swings, and they completely changed. They're struggling with a lot of commuters not really staying around, and everywhere they put these swings, people just started gravitating towards them. So it's a really interesting example of how it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge full landscape architecture plan. Sometimes it's a few simple interventions that don't have to be a major effort, to just kind of get some interesting prompts, some interesting furniture in there that invites people to play and do something different.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because what we found was we had some outdoor seating areas, but the sun, it gets really sunny, and so it's not a very comfortable place to be. So taking a look at how do we provide covered areas, or keep it open but also make it welcoming and inviting to use.
Karen's brought up a great comment in the chat, wondering if part of our lack of ability to answer the space question is because we don't know whether spaces are equitable and we haven't found ways to ask that question. Karen, do you want to talk to that? Or does anyone else have ways that they're assessing the equitability of their spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and we're we're working with a lot of institutions to dig into that, and you really need a kind of a mixed method approach, and it's qualitative and it's quantitative, but I think also it can be student led, but also student participated in. In other words, like the example from Portland Community College is a professor creating a class, training a set of students in effectively in applying critical race theory to audit spaces, and then those students basically learn that as well as observational skills and techniques, and then are able to audit the campus accordingly. But we haven't heard of that, much of that going on at other places. I think in our projects, we're always trying to use a combination of methods between services and surveys, I should say, and interviews and workshops, and meet folks where they are. But you really do need different approaches, and some of it really has to come from the students.
Annette, you've also got a great comment about the need for spaces beyond the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 5, excuse me. The thinking about the maintenance and the upkeep, certainly a part of when you're looking at a multi-use space. What are the norms around this? You know, who's stewarding that space? How does it, you know, not be just a totally generic space, but have a kind of sense of purpose that's going to draw people there for a specific activity or engagement? All great points, but feel free to jump in if you wanted to expand upon those.
Thank you for that, Kelly. I was just side chatting with my senior VP and provost, Dr. Anita, who's also in this session, about the comment on creating spaces that are culturally relevant. We have this initiative for our strategic plan that's centered on island wisdom. And I think it's important for diverse groups to have a place where they feel that they can connect to, the sense of belonging. So I just thought that that would be interesting to think about spaces that are culturally relevant and maybe even honoring the spaces in which they are erected or set on. And then the other thought is, you know, creating spaces online. How do you create these spaces and support the management of these spaces? It's nice to have these online spaces for connectivity, but I think the challenge is the management side of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think there's an interesting question about how do you do this online, which I think that's the $1 million question. I don't think anyone has cracked, you know, how to create a sense of place quite the same way virtually. But I think there are interesting, there's a lot of irons in the fire. There's a lot of interesting experiments going on, and it can be as simple as, you know, virtual backgrounds. You know, I think we work with a lot of libraries, and one of the interesting things they did is put out, you know, images of the reading room, so you could like put the reading room on in your background, in your Zoom background, or so there, you know, there's things, you know, kind of low tech, low hanging fruit kinds of things, and then there's more immersive environments via, you know, virtual reality and the like, where you can you know, effectively create a virtual version of a physical place, and then you know, in between there's lots of experimentation. I think Kelly's going to talk about a Minecraft campus later that was built by students. So there, you know, there's no one or easy answer to that, but I do think creating that sense of place online is really important, because, you know, if you think about it, think about the variation from classroom to classroom that used to, you know, that you had in physical space from campus to campus and classroom to classroom. Now, effectively, you've got what, 95% everyone having the same virtual classroom on Zoom, and you do miss some of the things that make something memorable, that make something unique, that make it feel welcoming or belonging, or provide that sense of place. So it's an important challenge. We've got a couple more minutes here, and then we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, give everybody a chance to grab a cup of coffee or take care of whatever you need to do, and then when we come back, we'll focus on solutions. But maybe we have time for one more question or comment before we do.
The conversation has led me to also think about ways that we use our spaces and define our spaces that create unwelcoming space, create an unwelcoming. So I mentioned we're PBI. We are also predominantly female. And so one of the challenges that our students face quite often is that they have a child that may need to come to campus with them, and we don't have spaces on our campus that welcome children. And in some ways, we make it very difficult for children to be there. So the library is one of the places I think of, which makes sense, right? This is a space of study, but if I have my, if I have my kid and I need to study, I don't, I don't like that students have to make a choice, right? That they can't
Yeah.
be in a particular space because they have a child. And so that to me is a way that our campus hasn't truly tackled how best to create spaces that give students that create the welcoming, the sense of welcome for parents, for parenting students, not just female, but parenting students of all types.
Yeah. And when you do that research and the outreach that we were talking about, folks might need to do, I think it was Karen who brought that up. That's one of the things you can ask is about what are the barriers? Sometimes the barriers might be time. This isn't open when I need it to be, but it might be something like I need to bring my child and there's no place, like we did a library at Central Piedmont Community College where there's sort of family-friendly group study rooms, and imagine a library that or a study room that has extra space and a kind of like a little play area off to the side to, make that happen. But I don't think there's a lot of those, and there certainly needs to be more.
Yeah, so Chabot Community College, the librarian there, in terms of programming, does a story time, I think, once a day or once a week or something, and it's directed directly at children. So, oh, we forgot to. Sorry, I was taking notes somewhere else.
We forgot to type into our notes slide, but that's okay. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back at 1:30. And when we do, we'll dig into recommendations and solutions and have another discussion period to help you kind of think through and process all this. So we'll see you back at 1:30. And thanks so much for your time and attention and comments thus far.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a time to get a glass of water or refresh yourself in some way. Getting into some recommendations and possible solutions here before we jump into more discussion. So as a baseline, it's really important that we recommend you educate yourself and your team, and make sure you're preparing for conversations about equity and inclusion by doing some background research, especially if somebody reaches out to you with some feedback. Don't just start from square one, and avoid placing the burden of representation on marginalized groups that are different from you. There's so many resources out there to learn about different issues more broadly faced in society and specific to higher ed. One we really recommend is this Racism Untaught program, and they offer trainings and a great list of resources. This is by Teresa Moses and Lisa Elsie Mercer, and it's focused on higher education as well. Next, let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm getting used to this remote control. The other piece to that is not only broadly just kind of getting that baseline for yourself and getting some training organized for teams, is to diversify the feedback loops you have on your own campus. So recognizing that those students balancing work and life and school and maybe struggling the most are the ones that are least likely to have the time and the energy to respond to open calls for feedback like surveys or, comments boxes, etc. In order to get past this, we recommend reaching out to multicultural groups and professional groups directly and adapting to their availability and format preferences, whether that's a meeting or a survey or going to their place, dropping by. Also be providing some compensation and follow-up for these sessions in recognition of their commitment and their time to provide this valuable feedback. And of course, if you're doing an event or inviting people to a session, it's important to be mindful of how physically accessible that space is. And also in your invitations, invite people to request accommodations and be prepared to follow through on those requests and be clear about what's happening with the feedback. Is that going into a report? What's going to come out of these sessions, so that there's not the sense that you've students have kind of shared so much and then not seeing any results from that. One tool we use when interpreting feedback that can be a longstanding reference for staff and for leaders who are planning new services or spaces or programs are these personas. So these are sort of like different characters representing the broader diversity of your student body. So that you avoid designing for kind of the average student or a monolith of students and are thinking about a character that maybe represents a parent or a character that represents a caregiver or a student with disabilities. And just keeping that top of mind when you're thinking through how students might respond to a new service or evaluating an existing service. A lot of these different suggestions have come up a little bit in our conversations, but celebrating and showcasing diversity, you know, if your staff aren't reflecting your student body, have your spaces reflect your student body. So boost visibility and celebrate the work of Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, disabled, scholars, other represented communities through exhibits, art, promoting their events, and recognize this doesn't just have to be stories that are acknowledging success or triumph, but also just show adversity. This was a really poignant piece of feedback we got from a student at Chabot College during our engagement there. You know, I wonder what it would be like for a community space to hold the struggles, failures, and pain of our people rather than glamorize its accomplishments and beauty. And to me, it would inspire, motivate, and challenge me to do better. And I believe the same for the community of Chabot. We also talk about human scale, and this goes back to kind of spaces maybe conveying the wrong message, not just scale, but comfort and amenities. So, you know, students needing access to support after hours. So where are there spaces for them 24 hours a day? And do those spaces have the lockers or kitchenettes so that students on a tight budget who are cooking their own food or living far from campus have a place to store and store their belongings and to eat? The other thing that we see on especially more historic college campuses is these architectural messages of authority and grandeur, the Greek columns, the Gothic superstructures, and those are kind of intentionally designed to make you feel small, which can only compound, you know, another series of microaggressions that could make a student feel small. So providing other spaces on campus that signal kind of home and hearth and comfort, a place to nestle in. Going back to who is assigned space on campus, looking at how you're allocating spaces and where those spaces are and what the quality of those spaces are. There's certainly a series of research showing that these safe spaces for identity groups are providing a really important refuge for students. We've heard it described as that space where there's no need to explain. So you can just go and be yourself and be comfortable. So important step to kind of look at are your spaces, you know, have they just kind of come together over time and been shuffled into buildings across campus, or do you have a clear system and policy for who's getting space and how that space is being assigned and allocated from year to year? In terms of getting students that support, improving the access and improving the awareness, one strategy here where we wanted to showcase is, you know, placing those services where the students are, placing them, for example, in the library where you're overlapping that study space with additional support, where students not only have the convenience of accessing professionals from different support organizations on campus, but also see other students getting that help and getting that support, which helps reduce the stigma. This is also an opportunity to expand and showcase peer-to-peer advising and leadership programs, which further, you know, reduce that intimidation barrier to getting help or an identity barrier. They help build community. And of course, then you take the student who's struggling, benefits from the program, and then maybe is leading the program later in their career and later in their time on campus and using that as the bridge to a career. We also recommend, you know, similar to this, meeting students where they are. That might not necessarily be in the library. So an example here at SUNY Fredonia is their Let's Talk program that offers counseling services and has a counselor embedded in the intercultural center that provides really low barrier to access. It's just you come by, you put your name on a card, you can kind of sit in an anonymous lounge area and talk to someone without making an appointment or having to go into the healthcare facility. During the pandemic, they've also been doing some different speaker series and kind of mental health events embedded in that digital space as well, which is just great to see. Another component of convenience here and kind of reducing barriers is centralizing services into one-stop shops. So, oftentimes when a student has a problem, it's not just one department that can solve it. There's been a ripple effect that's impacted a number of different components of the business of being a student or their ability to succeed and focus on academics and community and their college life. So a key strategy here can be centralizing both digitally and physically into one location. And not only does that make it easier for students to kind of go from service to service, but that also creates stronger connections between the service staff and just opens up more informal opportunities to improve processes and to increase cross-training and just the speed and efficiency so that you're not focusing on telling your story over and over again, but you're kind of quickly coming in and getting something resolved. Then we could look at the classroom. Elliot talked earlier about the importance of active learning and the impact that can have on student outcomes. And especially during the pandemic, a lot of schools realized that their active learning classrooms were the easiest to adapt for social distancing, and that flexibility really helps them maintain continuity for their classes. Recognizing these do provide or require additional space per seat, but thinking about, the trade-off of, do we maybe not need quite so many lecture spaces? Maybe some of those are shifting online, and that opens up more space for active learning so that inclusive practices and kind of evolved and experimental teaching has an easier environment, a more flexible environment for students. We've done a lot of work with libraries at Bright Spot. I'm a big fan of libraries, and I think they do provide a nice example of a organization on campus that's often pretty responsive to student feedback, and they've continually been evolving. So they've been changing their spaces to provide a variety of atmospheres, recognizing, it's not just about quiet space or individual space. There's students who need loud space to focus. There's group spaces, there's more projects. Also taking a look at their services to see how they can better meet needs of students. So providing tech checkouts where you can check out a laptop, a textbook lending. And I know some of these services were intentionally, initially the idea was you'd check out the laptop for 3 hours or a day. But during COVID, they've changed their service model to check these tools out for an entire term to make sure that those barriers aren't preventing students from accessing their online classes. And then, of course, policies. We've seen a lot of libraries opening up 24/7 spaces and relaxing their restrictions on eating, whether that's going as far as embedding a cafe in the library or just not punishing students for eating or having designated areas for eating. We also see an expansion and a benefit of providing project space on campus, space where skills workshops are offered, peer consultations are offered, inspirational events, access to tools and equipment, and just supporting activities outside of class where students are learning and building skills and making connections and able to advance their kind of passion projects, their culturally driven project or impact driven projects to help students connect not only to what's they're motivated to do, but also to other students with similar interests or other students interested in similar tech. So getting beyond kind of internal communities and getting beyond that. And then lastly, of course, we've been focusing on students, but the staff are also a critical backbone to making all of this happen. So creating flexible workspaces, tools and policies, and just recognizing that we've all learned we can work differently. Some are going to be enthusiastic about getting back on campus. Others are going to be enthusiastic about staying remotely. So we've all been kind of thrown into the deep end here, but as universities move forward, we're moving to a stage where there's going to be an intentional development of new tools, processes, looking at new norms and behaviors so that we can continue to work successfully, whether that be all the way in the office, a couple days in the office, or fully remotely. So in summary, it all starts with educating yourself, being open to feedback, broadening your awareness, and making some tools so that you can maintain that awareness. And then, a number of different strategies just from our engagements with students, faculty, and staff on a number of different campus that may be worth testing at your institution, or shopping around with some of your own students and staff, see what they think. All right, so we have another quick poll here. I'm curious to hear what of these possible recommendations are a good fit for your institution. What's jumping out to you? Looks like there's a lot of variety across here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to unpack. That could mean maybe folks are sort of in different places, different kinds of campus, different maybe uneven progress on their campuses.
Karen's shared in the chat, they've done faculty exchanges that are really popular, using a space for faculty to talk about anti-racism strategies. That's great. Can you tell us more about that, Karen?
Yes. Yeah, these are just Zoom sessions because we're almost entirely remote. And so they've been, we've had several a semester. They have different topics, but a number have been focused on anti-racism, on microaggressions and unconscious bias, and just giving faculty a kind of safe space to talk about what they're trying and what's working and not working, because I think people are they don't want to seem like they're not doing enough. Right? Everybody wants to be doing enough. And so it gives them a space to say, I tried this, it didn't work. And so next time I think I'm going to try something else. And somebody can say, oh, I've tried that, but I did it this way, and that worked better. And it just helps faculty communicate with each other and talk to each other in a space where they can feel comfortable, and where we're not leaving it to our small group of faculty of color to try to be the educators, to try to manage those conversations or lead those conversations. Instead, it's not really led, it's just faculty talking to faculty.
How have you all been managing feedback? I know that's been challenging during the pandemic. We've seen an interesting flip of seeing more students responding to surveys and fewer showing up to feedback sessions in our own work. But I'm curious to see how you all are getting feedback.
Are folks doing surveys? We've been hearing a lot about pulse surveys a couple times during the semester. We've also heard about surveys, kind of return to work surveys. How many days do you want to be in the office, kind of thing? Or under what conditions would you feel safe returning, or those kinds of things? Folks doing those on their campus?
There have been some surveys on our campus, particularly back to the return to work. I find that there's been, maybe because of the speed with which everything was occurring when the pandemic first hit, that there was resistance to spending, maybe not resistance, might be a bit harsh, but there was hesitancy in doing surveys because the decisions needed to be made so quickly. So there's not been, I think, enough effort to kind of get the pulse of what students and faculty and staff are feeling. We have been doing some open sessions, like on our Teams, and those have been inconsistently attended.
So we'll be sending this presentation out. We wanted to let you know there of some resources, some of the things we've been citing in this. you know, a way to think about access and awareness and equity in terms of student services under blog posts, the step-by-step process for integrating your services, ending the runaround, and creating anti-racist experiences in space. We've got some white papers about how to better support and sustain underserved students, about taking the pulse of students during COVID. We actually, I think, as of today, we can now add a white paper on our December survey. We've got a white paper on becoming a more adaptable institution. And then we've got some tools that you may be interested in. We have a student experience canvas to map out the student journey. It's a free online tool. I think about 300 universities and colleges are using it today, and a kind of a worksheet to think through the student experience. And then we also have a similar worksheet that Kelly really spearheaded the development of to help institutions with reopening. So Karen, this might be right up your alley, thinking about your repopulation, but it's basically a way to think through what are we going to offer, you know, courses, research projects, student services, and so forth. And for each of those, think about what you need to do with the 6 of the P's, which I'm probably going to forget one, but one is place and the other is products like PPE or furniture, technology, equipment, policies. 3 other P's, but they're great because it gives you a framework for your thinking. And we, you know, if you go to the tools section of our, we've got a lot of free stuff and you know, basically to help people structure and inspire their thinking. So we really appreciate your time and attention today. And the session's recorded. We're happy to share the deck. And we you know, we can do that through AASCU, or you know, you're welcome to reach out to us directly. We also share our insights about once a month, and it's not, you know, it's not promotional. It's us kind of noodling on a problem that we feel like lots of folks have, and sharing our experience. So you can sign up for that, and at the bottom there. Kelly, any closing comments?
Not particularly, just thank you all for coming and for sharing your insights, sharing some of the challenges and what's been working for you. We know students aren't the only ones that are Zoom fatigued. I think all of us are grappling with that. So thank you so much for showing up today and bringing your full selves.
Thank you. And as Kelly mentioned, we're open to feedback. So if you have any thoughts in the session or you want to let us know about anything, we're happy to hear it via email or through AASCU. So thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.